All right, interop is solved, and we can all go home. So first, I want to go through Jill, earlier in the week, gave this really good talk. And it talks about how hard times create strong protocols create good times create weak protocols, and weak protocols create hard times. So where are we in this cycle? This is where we are. We are in good times create weak protocols. So yes, I would agree. Interop is solved today, 100%. We have, intense. You can get, you can bridge between a lot of chains very quickly. So yeah, interop is solved, but it's only okay if we're okay with weak protocols. And the thing is, we aren't. We aren't okay with weak protocols. So interop is not solved. So what are we going to do? How do we fix this? Well, we need to, very obviously, make interop protocols stronger. That's the answer. So this is what this talk is about. So we have a lot of different interop type protocols that that people use. We have intense, we have multi-sig bridges, roll-up clusters, native bridges, and base sequencing, just to name a few. And I want to go through an example of a couple of these to kind of get to the root of what is the nature of all of these protocols. So let's start with native bridging through the L1. So in this one, B, it wants to receive a message from A. And so what happens, A will need to send its message through the L1, and then B will read it. And so what's actually the purpose of the L1 in this case? Well, normally we talk about it being settlement, but it's actually not settlement in this case. It's just to confirm A's state. So B does not trust A. B does trust the L1, so B uses the L1 to get a confirmation of A's state. And that's how native bridging works. Obviously, native bridging is slow, so let's move to intense. In intense, a solver will listen for a transaction on rollup A, and then it'll submit a transaction on rollup B that pays the user really quickly. So the solver needs some confirmation of the user's intent on A before it fills B. Obviously, it doesn't want to give the user funds on B if they haven't actually paid on A. And then the solver actually needs a second confirmation because when they want to go and reclaim their funds from the user when they can settle their order. And to do that, they need to have some confirmation that they did actually fulfill the intent, and so they have the right to claim their funds. All right, and then we'll look at roll-up clusters. So a lot of times in roll-up clusters, I'm just going to say, using this example, that all of the sequencers are kind of just talking directly to each other. And so what happens here? Well, in this case, B's sequencer does trust A and C. That's kind of required if you're going to be talking directly between the sequencers. But B still needs confirmation of the other two roll-up states. So what do all of these have in common? Might be pretty obvious. Confirmations. So confirmations are basically the foundation of interop. Any sort of interop protocol at some level has to have a credible confirmation of that roll-up state. So what is a confirmation? Well, a confirmation provides an end user with information about the state of a roll-up. That makes a lot of sense. But it's always based on some assumption. And this is where we get different confirmations. So here's a few examples. Let's say we're using a sequencer pre-confirmation. Well, it's based on the assumption that the sequencer is honest. If you're using a multi-sig, it's based on the assumption that the multi-sig committee is honest and the confirmation is honest. So if you're using a sequencer confirmation in your multi-sig, you have to trust both of those. And then, L1 finality is, well, 2/3 of the validators are honest. And I specifically want to point out these two, because these two are very popular today for bridging to use these kind of confirmations. But you're not actually just trusting that the sequencer wants to be honest. You're trusting that it does not get hacked and that these companies running them have good operational security and safe keys. And that's not necessarily the same as just trusting the company itself. So I would kind of argue in the case of sequencer confirmations and multi-sig confirmations that their security is only as good as how much they are paying their operational security people, essentially. All right, so L2B. As you can see, I just took this screenshot yesterday, and a lot of these bridges are third-party bridges. And I don't want to imply that these are necessarily insecure. The security of these bridges is very nuanced, and it depends a lot of the details. It depends who's validating them. So I don't want to go there. But the point is that a lot of these, to some degree, use either a multi-sig or they're using a sequencer pre-confirmation for security. That's the point. Okay, so we want security, but we need speed. This is the entire reason we don't bridge through the L1. Users want speed, and we do need speed. It's not optional if we want, people to adopt L2s. Okay, I would actually change this though to be we need security and we need speed. And I think when I've talked about this, the most common answer I get is that users don't care about security. And yeah, that's true. Users do not care about security. And that's why it's our job to care about security. All right, so let's go through a couple of examples where we're talking about the security of all of these different confirmations and kind of the after effects that can happen. All right, so B is going to be our rollup that's receiving messages from all of the other rollups. If it receives a message from rollup A, but it goes through the L1, B only has to trust the L1. And that's actually great because it has to trust the L1 anyway for its own state. So this is pretty easy, but it's slow. Well, let's look at the case where B trusts C's sequencer, and it receives messages directly from the sequencer. So in this case, B must trust C's sequencer, which means that they need to trust that C's sequencer is not going to get hacked or that it doesn't have an incentive to make money through some sort of an attack, etc. But what if C is also trusting D's sequencer, and D is also trusting E's sequencer? What that means is that B actually has to trust E's sequencer too, but it may not know that. So when C sends a message to B, it doesn't know if that message is based on state that actually originated on E, but it could be. So all of these trust assumptions, it comes down to that the weakest, the least secure rollup in all of these can ruin it for all of the other rollups. And well, let's add a multi-sig bridge in there. All right, so we have a multi-sig bridge, and this is kind of interesting. So you still have to trust the sequencers of C, D, and E because state could depend on them. But in the multi-sig, you also have to trust the multi-sig committee. And this gets something interesting, is that you could argue that multi-sigs are actually less secure than just trusting the sequencer confirmations themselves, which seems kind of at odds with what it should be. But it actually, you have more trust assumptions if you're adding a multi-sig in there that is basing its multi-sig off of the sequencer confirmations. And so yeah, this is just an example of, like, let's say E is a bad rollup, has bad security, sequencer gets hacked. Now it can ruin the state of rollup B. Rollup B might be a very secure rollup and very well run. It might have great operational security, but now its security is matched by the security of E that does not have good security. And this isn't good. From B's standpoint, it doesn't want to let any rollup ruin its state. So this is not really ideal. But the main point is that when you're communicating directly between rollups through their sequencers or via multisigs, is that you get these cascading trust assumptions. So you start out with like one, and then if, like let's say C, you trust C, well, let's say C trusts 5 different other rollups, so now B has to trust 5 different other rollups. If each of those 5 rollups trust another 5, you get this really big web of trust assumptions that's very difficult to manage, and the security of the system is equal to the weakest one. So let's go back to this, is B only needs to trust the L1. When we're going through the L1, this is a really simple trust assumption. Everybody already trusts the L1, and so can we try to recreate this somehow in a way that's fast and not taking 15 minutes? Yes, I'm going to introduce the concept of an L1.5. And in L1.5, B only needs to trust the L1.5. The L1.5 is basically like the L1. It runs a consensus protocol. It's secured by a lot of nodes that are restaked. But B only has to trust it instead of C sequencer directly. And the idea is that this is a network, a geo-distributed network of nodes that is secured by a lot of stake, just like the L1, so that the confirmation that the L1.5 gives you will be very strong. And notice that even if E over here, creates bad state and it poisons C over here, once C has settled to the put its confirmation on the layer 1.5, that is what C has to settle. So C cannot reorg at that point. So it actually breaks the chain of trust dependencies. So B only has to trust the L1.5 instead of all of the other sequencers. So this is an example where E cannot poison rollup B. And the main point here is that interop is only as secure as the confirmation you're using underneath it. All right, so confirmations have layers, and let's go through those. So here I put a sequencer and a multisig, and I kind of put them next to each other because it's difficult to directly compare the security of them because they're very nuanced. But I think most people would agree that a sequencer confirmation and a multisig confirmation are not super secure. And then you have L1 finality, 15 minutes, which is very secure. So that's what all of this space, this brown space is supposed to represent, is how much more secure the L1 is than a sequencer confirmation. And here, we can put in the L1.5. So the L1.5 can get pretty close to L1 security. There's not a whole lot of gap in between there. And it's way more security than the sequencer or the multisig. That's the point. But, okay, L1 finality is slow. Is this L1.5 also slow? No, that's the really cool thing. This represents speed. So all of this brown space represents the speed. L1 finality is slow. You can actually get L1.5 finality really quickly. It's only a little bit longer than a sequencer or a multisig confirmation. So this is a really good trade-off. And basically it's like this. So sometimes when we think about security and speed, we say, okay, if you want more speed, you have to decrease security, and you assume it's a linear function. But it's actually not linear. You can actually have optimized points like right here and right here on the curve where you can get a pretty good trade-off of both speed and security. And well, why is this, you could ask? And the reason is that it's the difference of the protocols that are used. So Ethereum uses a dynamically available protocol, which means that it can continue to make progress even if a lot of the validators are offline. Versus an L1.5 can choose to use a fast finality protocol that will not make progress if a lot of the validators are offline, but when they are online, which is most of the time, it can make progress very, very fast. All right, so let's go back to our good times create weak protocols picture here. So we said earlier in the talk that we need to make interop protocols stronger. I feel like this is something we could all agree on. And interop protocols are only as strong as their confirmations. So what does that mean? We need to use strong confirmations in our interop protocols. All right, thank you. Any questions? Yeah, Marcin.
What would be an example of 1.5?
Well, as you probably know, it would be Espresso. Any other questions? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if it's the case where the sequencers are all connected directly, then all of them would end up taking some loss. So B would take some loss because now they have state that is incorrect. But if you're using the L1.5, it's B is actually safe. It's just all of the rollups that weren't using it, they have to take the hit. So it kind of isolates the damage possible for a rollup.
And I guess it's also probably like very app specific, like say the configuration of the bridge, right?
Yeah.
Who sort of takes the loss.
All right, thank you.